What would you say about tariffs and how they've affected some of the transactions that you've been around?
Initially, people were very confused on what's going on. I actually had two separate transactions that I was working on at the time, which were both cross-border transactions. One in Europe and the other one was in South America, and both transactions just halted. The parties said, we're confused, we don't know what's going on, we'll revisit this in Q3, Q4.
Welcome to Own the Jet by Aspen Aero Group, where we share perspectives from some of the leading voices in private jet ownership and business aviation. I'm your host, Derek Savage, along with my co-host, Jason Spoor, president of Aspen Aero Group. Our guest today is Nada Ragland from Aero Law Center. Neta helps protect jet buyers during the process of purchasing an aircraft and is a strong advocate for educating clients on the opportunities and pitfalls of jet ownership. Join us as we dive deep into the mechanics, mindset, and moments that define jet ownership. And together, we'll learn what it takes to own the jet.
Welcome, Nada Ragland, to Own the Jet. And so Neta, you are an attorney in the aviation space and deal specifically with all things aviation as opposed to all the other things that you could do as an attorney.
Yeah, exactly. So my experience solely is in aviation, which means that I do a lot of aircraft transactions, mergers and acquisitions with aviation companies, working with certificated companies such as charter operators, repair stations, and then also litigating in all aspects of that. So yeah, focus on aviation, my firm, all the attorneys, that's all we do.
So if I'm in the situation where I'm wanting to own the jet, right, and let's say I want to buy, a Global or something like that, $10+ million jet, why do I need to work with somebody that is aviation specific? What's the purpose for that?
It's really important to work with an attorney that's experienced with aircraft transactions specifically. The reason for that really is that it's unlike any other asset or personal property that you're purchasing. They are a huge investment, for the most part. And also they're incredibly regulated. So it's important to work with a experienced aviation attorney that, first of all, knows how to structure the ownership of that aircraft, how to structure the operation, depending on what you plan on doing with the aircraft. Again, it's highly regulated, especially with operations. So you have to be careful with how, what you're doing with that aircraft. Otherwise, you could get a very scary letter from the FAA and have to call me anyways. But, I think the complexity of the transaction itself, because we're dealing with such a interesting and different asset that, you don't find in real estate, a lot of these issues, and the fact that there's so much regulation behind it, it's important to work with an experienced attorney. Also, I've found, and I've worked with, on the other side, if I'm representing a seller or a buyer, if I'm working with an attorney on the other side who is not an aviation attorney, typically, and I don't want to make a general statement, but typically the transaction runs a little bit less smooth.
Okay. You spend some time trying to educate.
Exactly. And we're going back and forth on a point that, as an aviation attorney, that, well, that's standard in a purchase agreement. There's not much we can do about that, but you have to argue with the other side, and kind of just makes the road a little bit bumpier. So I would say the most important part is to clear out all of those roadblocks, is working with an experienced aviation attorney to navigate all of the parties that are involved. And that's another thing, when you're doing a aircraft transaction, you have several different components to it. If there's financing involved, you're dealing with the lender. There's a whole host of loan documents that an experienced aviation attorney can look at and negotiate key points that may be important to you that you wouldn't even think of. For example, is there something in the loan documents that, restricts some of your operation of that aircraft? And maybe we want to rework that. For example, if there's certain regions that you can't fly to, but you're planning on flying there, that's something to be mindful of. Then you have your technical side of things. So making sure, if you're representing the buyer, that they're taking it to the correct repair station or MRO to do that inspection, to have a solid pre-buy inspection. So you have your technical team, and then you have escrow. You want to make sure title is clear. And then if there is issues with title, your experienced aviation attorney can, clear that up and fix that up for you. So it's more so of, an aviation attorney will have the experience of knowing what to look for and what to anticipate before it happens. Whereas a real estate attorney or an estate attorney or, your in-house counsel may just not be very much aware of that, or even the regulations around it all.
Yeah. Nice. Now, Jason, as a broker, you've probably worked with attorneys quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
Well, again, going in to buy an airplane, we're looking at LOIs, right? So we're going to start with that, and that's going to be an attorney-driven function. And then move it in there, we're going to next work on a purchase agreement, right? So
Yep, exactly, yeah.
It's all going to be...
Yep. And the earlier you have these key component pieces in place in the process, it's going to be a smoother transaction for sure. And you mentioned the LOI phase, and people think, oh, it's a non-binding one-pager. What's the big deal? But I'm sure you've experienced this as well, but that LOI really sets the tone for the entire transaction.
Exactly.
And it's important to get that right and make sure you're covering the right commercial terms, because if you don't agree on the pre-buy or the deposit or when it goes hard, you're going to have a hard time through the entire transaction.
Yeah.
So
agreed.
Yeah.
Do you run into situations where it's like the LOI, like they're not agreeing with it and it just blows the whole deal up before you even get started?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a few situations where I was not brought in or engaged by the buyer until we were at the pre-purchase inspection, the APA phase. So they already had an LOI executed, but the LOI didn't actually provide acceptance rejection rights. So it didn't say that. And this is something that I always would want to negotiate beforehand. What are the expectations of the parties? From a buyer's perspective, my expectation would be that I would like to have agreed upon work scope for my pre-buy, where I can take a look at the condition of the aircraft, open up panels if we negotiate that, look for corrosion, whatever might be.
Totally reasonable stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you're gonna pay that much for an aircraft,
you want to make sure it's in the condition it's in.
Kicking the tires a bit.
Exactly. So that's key. You have to agree on that.
Yeah.
Also, the second piece of that, which was missing in this particular LOI that I'm referencing, was what's the procedure after the pre-buy? Typically, for a buyer, I would like to have a acceptance rejection period where once you do the inspection, you get the inspection report, and the buyer has the ability, depending on how significant the findings are in that report, to walk away from the deal. If we're talking about an aircraft that's riddled with corrosion, and being in Florida, we see it quite a bit.
Sure.
That the value of that aircraft just completely, it's not the value that you wanted to buy it at. So you either renegotiate the purchase price or you can reject it and move on. Anyway, so this particular LOI didn't have any of that in there.
Okay.
And so now we're at the pre-buy phase. They're trying to negotiate the APA. The buyer is now pushing to put that into the APA. The seller is saying absolutely not. We never agreed to that.
APA is the purchase agreement, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, aircraft purchase agreement. So that's why it's important to hammer out those very important details from the beginning.
Right.
And it really is setting expectations,
Sure.
How did you get into this field? I mean, how does somebody, find themselves being a part, and you're a partner?
I'm a partner, yes. I'm a partner at Aero Law Center.
In an aviation-specific law firm in Fort Lauderdale.
So the short answer is I fell into it.
Okay.
It was the perfect moment where luck meets preparation and hard work. I was interviewing all over the place, looking for a law firm to land at, and I happened to find Aero Law Center that was looking for an associate attorney. I went on the interview, didn't realize that aviation law was even an area that a lawyer could practice in. I didn't have that much, knowledge about aviation, except for the fact that I like to fly around and travel.
Right.
Yeah.
You're like, well, I like to fly.
Yeah. Exactly. So besides that, my knowledge of aviation law was very limited, and I decided to go on this interview. I ended up landing the job, and ever since then, I've been practicing aviation law with Aero Law Center and loving it. And now I have such a passion for it. I love business aviation specifically. I love working in this space. The people that I work with are great. It's a very small industry in a way, so you get to know people, faces constantly. And it just so happened that I joined the firm. It was I was the associate attorney at the time. My founding the founding partner was there, and we had one paralegal, and became, kind of worked up the ranks in the firm and became partner. And now we have about 8 attorneys total, 2 of counsel, and a staff of 15 total. So we've certainly grown.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking to own the jet, right? If I want to buy a jet, am I reaching out to you guys directly, or is it my broker that reaches out to you, or like how do I even get in touch with Aero?
It's a mixture. So I think the simplest answer is give us a call. We do offer free consultations. And again, my firm, we handle transactions, we handle regulatory work. So if you have trouble with the FAA for any reason, pilot actions, things like that, we work with those. We also litigate. So if there's any kind of situation where you just have a question about it, or you're looking to buy an aircraft, you don't know where to start, you can give us a call. We do offer a free consultation. On the other side, if you are working with a broker, I do work with brokers constantly, and they bring a lot of buyers my way. I think the important thing is to just engage, just get that process started as early as possible. You don't want to wait until the last minute to bring in your lawyer.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the LOA, right?
Yeah.
So would it be a good idea that like somewhere between talking to like, hey, I'm looking to buy, a Challenger or whatever, prior to signing anything, would that be a good kind of like?
I think the perfect time to call me is when you have identified the aircraft that you want to buy.
Okay. It's
think
like,
that's
I need
the
to
sweet
lawyer
spot.
up.
Yeah.
I'm hitting the gym. I'm deleting Facebook. I'm lawyering up. We're going to buy this plane.
Totally
Exactly.
agree.
Okay.
Totally agree.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Okay, so if you finance your purchase, how important is it to understand what's in the flight documents as it pertains to your flight mission, if you're going to do the finance?
Yeah, so with financing, obviously you're going to have a ton of loan documents. You're going to have to sign a bunch of documents with the lender, the bank, whoever is funding that. And those loan documents, it's going to have pages and pages and pages of obligations, of what you have to do, maintaining the aircraft, probably putting on a maintenance program. They're going to require a lot of things from you because that's collateral that they need to protect. But also in those lengthy loan documents, you'll also find things that you can't do with that aircraft, right? And basic things are obviously don't fly it into Iran, things like that.
Oops.
Right. So, definitely operating it within the scope of the law, but it also sometimes they have, and I've seen this with particular clients that I've worked with, some lenders will actually restrict operations into certain countries or areas. For example, I had a loan document for a client that I was reviewing that restricted his operation in the Caribbean. And this particular client of mine had a second home in the Caribbean, and his plan was to fly there, every other weekend and go to a second home.
But the bank didn't want him to?
So that was just in their standard form. I don't know why, they develop these forms over time, so I'm sure there was some sort of instance where
Something happened.
Yeah, so they put that in there.
They lost a plane somewhere somehow.
Just disappeared.
Something happened. Yeah, something happened. But when you have someone kind of looking over those documents that knows what to look for and understands what your operation, what your intent is with that aircraft,
Right.
I'm able to point those things out and make sure that we go back to the lender and kind of explain to them, well, this can't go in there because he's, and explain the whole situation. And of course, they tell you these are standard forms, which for the most part they are, but there are certain aspects that you can negotiate. And that's when working with aviation counsel makes sense. Because if a real estate lawyer looked at that, they wouldn't really know what to do with it. They don't actually know how to read a loan document specific to aircraft. So, so that's a good example of read that document. I know it's lengthy. I know it's boring.
Well, and that's like people tell you things are boilerplate. I mean, you see this in all areas of law, right? Oh, it's just boilerplate standard language. Go ahead and sign it.
Exactly.
Oh, hold on.
Exactly.
Because you never know until you read
There's a
it.
sentence in there that's restricting me.
Right.
Exactly,
Right.
Yep.
One thing that's been on a lot of people's minds lately has been the whole situation regarding tariffs. That's something that's like new to a lot of people that are operating in a lot of different industries.
Yep.
And I can imagine that it affects aviation quite a bit because there's such large sums of money being tossed around here.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So what have you experienced, or what could, in terms of the people that you're working with, what would you say about tariffs and how they've affected some of the transactions that you've been around?
There was so much confusion around exactly what was happening. We all saw it. The numbers were going up and down, and, certain countries were being hit and other countries were kind of sliding by. There was just a lot of confusion around it. So I think that in the industry, what I experienced with my clients that were in the process of purchasing aircraft and attempting to import it from Europe or South America or even the Asian markets was that initial shock of, we don't want to pay a 135% tariff on this, $10 million aircraft that we're purchasing and importing to the U.S. It's already a very expensive and complex process, and then to throw that wrench in there was kind of shocking for everyone. Initially, people were very confused on what's going on. I actually had 2 separate transactions that I was working on at the time, which were both cross-border transactions. One in Europe and the other one was in South America, and both transactions just halted. The parties said, we're confused, we don't know what's going on, we'll revisit this in Q3, Q4. We're not touching this right now.
Oh, okay.
So it did have an effect on the industry, I think. I saw it personally, firsthand. I do think, however, now that we're sort of past that initial shock and people are sort of looking into it a little bit more, reading up on it a little bit more, and planning a little bit better, I think it's softened. I think the industry is getting comfortable somewhat with the tariffs and are understanding this may just be the cost of doing business.
Just treat it like any other kind of like additional tax fee, whatever, right?
Yeah. I think also it had an effect on volume, because what I saw was a lot of those, like I said, I was working in the Asian markets at the time.
Okay.
A lot of the Asian sellers, in China and India specifically, which is a booming business aviation industry right now.
Okay.
A lot of, those sellers over there just did not want to deal with American buyers, and so they decided we're only going to sell to, anyone outside of America, essentially, and just not deal with the tariffs or any of that. So I think it did kind of affect the inventory that we saw for a little bit. But again, I think it's softening, and I think people are...
It's like, wait, come back.
Yeah.
We got solutions.
You can't close off huge industries like that. Like I said, India right now is number 1 in business aviation. They're doing so much over there.
And plus, it seems like with the tariffs too, they're volatile, right? So we're going to do 135% on Canada, and then a couple weeks later, wow, we came to an agreement. It's only on this, and this. And so, tracking that and keeping score, so to speak, is kind of a difficult. Seems to be. I have a deal right now, another one in Europe, and it's a Piaggio. So it's, it's definitely, it's prime for tariffs.
Okay.
And with that even, we are trying to work the closing around the volatility of the tariffs. There was a pause, so it was at 10% for some time. They just announced it's going back to 50%, which goes into effect August 1st. So now we're rushing to meet that deadline. Right. Yeah. So
and it's coming here.
It's coming to the U.S. Yeah. So we're just trying to move all these pieces, and of course, as you probably know, and importing an aircraft into the United States is not a 1-week process. You have to get a DAR, you have to go through customs. It's a lengthy process. Yeah. So adding the tariffs and navigating that and making sure that we're meeting these obligatory deadlines, in my opinion, just adds complexity to it. But it certainly can be done. No one should be deterred by it. It now is a cost of doing business.
What are some things that people might not understand going into buying an aircraft that you tend to help them understand? Like, what are some common kind of like misconceptions or some common things that you might have to steer them in the right direction on?
I would say it's kind of 2 parts, right? So first is the acquisition. What do you need to know there?
Yeah.
The second piece is, okay, now you have this big, beautiful new jet. Awesome. how am I going to operate it within the confines of what the regulators will allow? With the acquisition, it's very important to have the right team for that. I call it the acquisition team, and I like to say the lawyer is the captain of the acquisition team.
Of course, the
kind of
lawyer
guiding.
says that.
Of course.
Well, the broker thinks that the broker is the captain.
I'm in charge.
Yeah.
It depends, yes. But someone needs to coordinate all these people and all these moving parts.
Sure.
So with the acquisition, it's important for a buyer, especially first-time buyer, to keep two things kind of in mind, in my view. First is the pre-buy inspection. That is so important. You want to make sure that you're working with an independent third-party MRO. You don't want to use the seller's maintenance guy. You don't want to take it to the seller's repair station. You want an independent evaluator for obvious reasons, I think.
Okay.
And then from that, you also want to make sure that you're getting a title report pretty early on to understand if there's any liens on the aircraft that we need to deal with before closing. And typically, if there's liens on there, that's not uncommon.
Is that prior to the LOI, or is that after the LOI gets signed?
So I typically will do the title search, report back from the escrow agent, like after LOI before APA. It kind of depends on the transaction,
Right.
But yeah, you want to kind of be a little bit further down the line to make sure that you're going to go through with that aircraft. But I would say those are kind of two key things that a lot of first-time buyers don't really think about. And then also making sure that the like I mentioned before, the acceptance rejection is ironclad in that purchase agreement, giving them the right to kind of make that decision post pre-buy inspection once they know the condition of the aircraft. Because with used aircraft, it's an as-is. Typically, it's an as-is sale. You get what you get, and there's really very little recourse.
And if you didn't check it out beforehand, that's on you.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's very important. So from the acquisition perspective, I think just teeing up the transaction to give the buyer as much flexibility as we possibly can negotiate, but also making sure that they're working with the right team, they have the right technical person evaluating that aircraft to make sure that we're not missing anything that's going to be a huge problem for the buyer post-closing.
Yeah.
Then on the operation side of things, once you've acquired the aircraft, great. Before even finishing the closing, we need to understand what your flight mission is. What's the purpose of buying the aircraft? Are you buying it for business flights, personal flights? Do you plan on leasing it to a flight school? Do you plan on conforming it onto a charter operator certificate? By knowing that, we're able to first structure the ownership of the aircraft to make sure that it complies with whatever you're trying to do.
Right.
And then also, other key kind of components of operation is the regulations, the federal aviation regulations. They're lengthy and they tell you all kinds of things on what you are able and not able to do with your aircraft, how you can operate it. And, one thing that I've noticed in recent kind of transactions that I've been a part of is people kind of miss some of those key components. One example is if you are what we call a Part 91 operator, which is using it for personal business use, but just you're operating it. If you want to fly, I'll give an example. If you want to operate in a specific manner, for example, if you want to fly above 29,000 feet, if you have the capability and you plan on doing that. Well, you're required to obtain a letter of authorization from the FAA to authorize you to do that. And without that would be a violation of the regulations.
And I'm sure they have their reasons for that, right?
Yeah.
But I wouldn't know that.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And a lot of first-time jet owners won't know that. Yeah.
So do you work with that? Do you work with getting and obtaining those LOIs?
Yes, I do. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Typically, a lot of clients will have if you have contract pilots, for example, if you work with, a company that will provide you contract pilots, they typically take care of all that for you. It's kind of part of their package. But if you have someone that's, new to aviation, I always like to bring that up to my clients, even if they are working with contract pilots or have their own pilots that already probably have that in place. I always like to mention that at the closing is, okay, if you're going to be operating and I give them a list, there's a great guide that walks you through LOIs. I give them a list. If you're going to operate any of these ways, we'll have to obtain an LOA for you. So making them aware to make sure that piece is not missed,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's
So I mean, is there like hoops you got to jump through to get that kind of authorization, or
No,
is it just kind of like
it's a request to the FAA.
we just
and,
we just want you to ask us?
just
Is that
ask.
all it is?
It's a very
How
it's,
asinine of
Right.
them.
Yeah, you're giving them documents just to sort of
Yeah.
make sure the
Okay.
airplane's certified for that airspace.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. But it's a quick, easy
is.
process. It's
Yeah.
very painless. It's just a matter of actually asking, providing
Okay.
them documents, and it's really not difficult. But it's often missed, so it's something that people need to be aware of.
Yeah. If I'm in the position to own the jet, right? If I'm in a position to start researching this, and I'm hearing all about this bonus depreciation, I'm hearing about all this stuff that is going to be a catalyst for me wanting to pull the trigger on a purchase, what's the next best thing I can do from your perspective?
So I would suggest one of two things. Either if you know a trusted, good aircraft broker that has been recommended to you by other people in the industry or that you're familiar with, that might be the first step, right? Is to identify the aircraft if you haven't already done that. And a broker would be a great resource for that to help you. Other way that you could do it is to call me and kind of get that ball rolling. I also, when I'm working with prospective clients that haven't actually identified the aircraft that they want to purchase, they just have the idea that I want to purchase an aircraft. I typically would even send them to an aircraft broker and say, all right, well, identify the aircraft and call me back, and I'll refer them over to, to you guys.
You're like, I got
and
no
say,
planes.
Right.
Yeah,
I don't have planes. Yeah.
They'll
Right,
find
right.
the plane and then come back to me.
Right.
So yeah, one of two ways. The key really is just to get in contact with a trusted person that has a good reputation in the industry, and that's very easy to find out. Just ask around.
Yeah. I
Either
know
a
a
broker
guy.
or a lawyer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we'd like you to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
So, closing thoughts here. Is there anything else that people need to know prior to entering into one of these transactions? Because I know it's a lot of money, it's a lot of risk. Any kind of closing thoughts in regards to that?
A lot of people will kind of save on the attorney's fees in order to kind of make the deal work for them. But that initial front end investment ends up, saving you thousands, if not millions, on the back end, because if that transaction is not done correctly, you could end up with a lot of liability and lost income and lost time and a lot of things that you're just not going to catch unless you're working with someone who's experienced in that space. You're spending a lot of money on this huge asset. Give a little bit more on the front end investment.
Right.
Sounds great. And on that note, what would be the best way for somebody to reach out to you?
So you can go on our website, aerolawcenter.com, AERO, and give us a call. Like I said, we do offer free consultations. So our phone number is on there. Just give our office a call. We'll set you up with a free consult, either with myself or my managing litigation attorney or my partner, John. So either one of us will take care of you.
Awesome. Great.
And we'll put our contact information.
There is going to be a link in the description below on the
Perfect.
video. And make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. And they could probably follow you on LinkedIn, right? I mean, you guys have
Yeah.
a LinkedIn. You guys have all
We're
your
on
social
all
channels.
the socials. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. We're on all of the socials. So Aero Law Center, look for us anywhere. And yeah, please follow and like and keep in touch.
Perfect. Nada Ragland, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for
Absolutely.
having me. Thank you.
All right. Awesome.
Thank you for watching Own the Jet. If you want to see more Own the Jet, make sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube and leave a comment telling us what aspect of jet ownership you'd like to know more about. Own the Jet is brought to you by Aspen Aero Group, your trusted partner in private and corporate jet ownership. Learn more at aspenaerogroup.com. This has been a Savage Media production.